My grandson pointed at a 14-year-old girl in front of 200 people and said poor people shouldn't be allowed at private schools. Everyone laughed. His mother laughed. And I sat there in the third row wearing a name tag that said grandparent guest while the granddaughter of a woman who cleans houses for a living stood on that stage and heard every word of it. I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything either. Not yet. 3 weeks later, I stood up in front of the Ashcombe Preparatory Academy Board of Trustees, and I told them exactly who I was. Most of them didn't know. That was about to change everything for my family, and for a 14-year-old girl named Maya Delgado who had no idea, not for 1 second, that the quiet old man clapping politely in the back row of her school auditorium had been paying her tuition since she was in the 4th grade. My name is Walter Kessler. Everybody calls me Walt. I'm 67 years old. I spent 41 years as a structural engineer, and for the last 26 of those I ran my own firm, Kessler Structural Group, out of a building on Cherry Street in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I built bridges. I built parking decks that didn't fall down in a 100-year flood. I believed, for most of my adult life, that if you worked with your hands and kept your word, the people you loved would grow up understanding what it costs to build something. I was wrong about that. Or at least I was wrong about how it would land 2 generations down the line. Give me a minute, and I'll show you exactly how wrong. Let me back up. I grew up in Kannapolis, North Carolina, in a 4-room mill house 2 streets over from the Cannon Mills plant, where my father worked the number 3 loom for 34 years. We didn't have much. My mother stretched a whole chicken across 4 dinners. I wore my older cousin's boots until the soles separated from the leather, and my father fixed them with wire because a new pair cost money we didn't spend on things that could still be fixed. I tell you that not to make you feel sorry for a 7-year-old boy in Kannapolis in 1966. I tell you that because it matters for what happened 58 years later in an auditorium on Silas Creek Parkway. I got a scholarship to North Carolina State in 1977. Civil engineering. I graduated in 4 years with a $50 tie my mother bought me for the interviews, and I never once forgot who paid the light bill in that house on Ridge Avenue. I built my company from a card table in a rented office in 1985. By the time I sold my majority stake in 2019, Kessler Structural Group had 412 employees across 3 states. I did well. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about a poor man. It's a story about what happens to money once it leaves your hands and lands in the hands of people who never had to build anything themselves. I have one son, Bradley. He's 41 now. Good kid growing up, or so I always believed. Smart, easy laugh, played baseball at Reynolds High. He married a woman named Vanessa Hale in 2009. The Hale family owns 4 car dealerships across the Triad: Hale Ford, Hale Chevrolet, 2 Hale Honda locations, 1 in Clemens, and 1 out on Peters Creek Parkway. Good people on paper. Vanessa's father, Donald Hale, built that business from 2 lots in the 1980s, and I respected that. Still do, honestly. But somewhere between 2 generations of comfort, something got lost in translation. My grandson Preston is 14. He's a freshman this year at Ashcombe Preparatory Academy, one of the oldest and most expensive private schools in the state. Tuition running around $34,000 a year, out on Silas Creek Parkway in a building with ivy actually growing on real brick. The kind of place that looks like it was built to remind you that some families have always belonged there and some families never will. Here's the piece nobody in my family knew. Not Bradley. Not Vanessa. Not Preston. 12 years ago, in the fall of 2012, I made an anonymous gift to Ashcombe Preparatory Academy. $2.4 million, structured as an endowed scholarship fund, administered through a donor-advised account at a community foundation, so my name would never appear on a single piece of paper the school could trace back to me. I called it the Ridge Avenue Scholars Fund, named for the street I grew up on in Kannapolis, and I told the head of school at the time, a woman named Dr. Loretta Sims, that I wanted exactly one thing in exchange for my silence. I wanted to sit on the scholarship review committee under a name nobody would recognize, and I wanted to see, every single year, exactly which kids that money changed. Dr. Sims agreed. For 12 years, I went by Mr. K on the paperwork, and every spring I sat in a conference room and read essays from working families across Forsyth County, deciding which of their kids would get a shot at that ivy-covered building. My own son had no idea his father held a permanent, if quiet, seat on the board of trustees of the school his son attended. I liked it that way. I want to be clear about this part, because people ask me later why I hid it for so long. I didn't hide it out of shame. I hid it because I wanted to know what my family actually believed when they thought no one who mattered was listening. I found out on a Saturday morning in early October. It was the Fall Family Showcase, Ashcombe's big annual event, the one where the ninth grade STEM program presents its semester projects to parents, grandparents, and half the trustee board in the Whitfield Auditorium, a beautiful old room with red velvet seats, and a stage they've had since 1961. Vanessa had asked me to come along that morning, mostly, I think, because Bradley had a work conflict and she needed someone in the family section so Preston wouldn't look like he had nobody there. I said yes immediately. I always say yes to that boy. I've watched him grow up from a red-faced newborn in a hospital blanket at Forsyth Medical Center to a 14-year-old who still, even now, calls me Pop when nobody else is around. I got there at 9:40 that morning, parked my truck, a 2018 Ford F-150, not the kind of vehicle that usually sits in the Ashcombe visitor lot next to the German sedans, and I found a seat in the third row next to Vanessa. Preston's robotics team had built a water filtration model for a competition, and he was one of 4 students presenting it. I want you to understand, I was proud. Genuinely, uncomplicated, grandfather in the third row proud. I had my phone out ready to record it for Ray. Ray Delacroix is my oldest friend. We served together, 2 years at Fort Bragg back in the early 70s before I went to state, and Ray became a family court judge here in Forsyth County, retired now after 26 years on the bench. Ray's the kind of friend who tells you the truth even when it costs him the invitation to your next barbecue. I text him everything. That morning I texted him a photo of the auditorium and wrote, "Preston presenting today, feeling like a proud old fool." Ray wrote back a thumbs up and "Give that boy hell for me." I didn't know yet that I'd be calling Ray that same night with a very different kind of message. The presentations ran in alphabetical order by last name. Preston's group went fourth, and they were good, genuinely good. A working model with a hand-crank pump and a 3-stage filter that pulled visible sediment out of a jar of muddy water in front of everybody. I clapped hard. Vanessa clapped hard. Preston found my eyes in the crowd and grinned that grin he's had since he was 2 years old, missing a tooth, absolutely sure of himself. Then came the 5th group, and that's when I met Maya Delgado, though I didn't know her name yet. Maya stood up front and center for her group's presentation, a soil erosion model built out of a cut 2-liter bottle and layered dirt from what looked like her own backyard. Her voice shook a little at the start, the way any 14-year-old's does in front of 200 people. But she found her footing fast, and by the end, she was explaining root systems and water table saturation like she'd been doing it her whole life. I leaned over to Vanessa and said, "That's sharp work." Vanessa didn't answer. I noticed that later. I didn't think much of it at the time. The trouble started at the reception afterward, out in the courtyard between the science building and the chapel, where the school had set up long tables with lemonade and little sandwiches cut into triangles. I was standing near the fountain with Vanessa, waiting for Preston to finish talking with his teacher, when a cluster of boys walked past. Preston and 3 friends, boys I recognized vaguely from birthday parties over the years. One of them named Grayson, another named Beckett, the kind of names that only exist in a zip code like this one. Maya Delgado was standing about 15 feet away with a woman I assumed was her mother, both of them holding paper cups of lemonade, both of them smiling at something on Maya's phone. I heard Grayson say something first, low, not quite low enough. I only caught the end of it. Something about the free ones. Preston laughed. Then Preston, my grandson, the boy who calls me Pop, pointed, actually raised his arm and pointed, right across that courtyard, right at Maya Delgado, and said, loud enough that at least a dozen people turned around, "Poor people shouldn't even be allowed at schools like this." It's kind of embarrassing for everyone, honestly. I want to be precise about what happened next, because people ask me this too. Nobody gasped. Nobody stepped in. A couple of the adults standing nearby actually laughed. Not a big laugh, a small, awkward, complicit laugh, the kind adults do when they think a comment is inappropriate, but also a little bit funny, the kind of laugh that tells a 14-year-old boy he's said something clever. Vanessa, standing right next to me, let out a short breath through her nose that was unmistakably amusement, quickly covered by her hand. I watched Maya Delgado's face. She didn't cry. I'll give that girl more credit than I can put into words for that. She just went still, the particular stillness of someone deciding, in real time, whether to let it land or armor up against it. Her mother put a hand on her shoulder and steered her gently toward the parking lot, and neither of them said a single word back. I stood by that fountain, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt since I was 7 years old wearing my cousin's wired-together boots. I didn't say anything right then. I want you to sit with that, because I've thought about it every day since. I didn't march over. I didn't grab Preston by the collar. I stood there, 67 years old, and I let the moment pass, because some part of me needed to understand it before I responded to it. That's not weakness. That's 41 years of engineering training talking. You don't reinforce a structure until you know exactly where the crack started. On the drive home that afternoon, alone in my truck on University Parkway, I called Ray. "You still there?" He asked when he picked up. "I need to tell you something my grandson said today," I said. "And I need you to tell me if I'm overreacting." I told him everything. The pointing, the laugh, the word embarrassing. Ray was quiet for a long moment on the other end, long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Walt," he finally said, "you've never once overreacted to anything in the 30 years I've known you. If anything, you underreact. So no, you're not overreacting. The question is what you're going to do about it." "I don't know yet," I said. "Well," Ray said, "you've got a seat on that board nobody knows about. Sounds to me like it might be time to use it." I didn't answer him right away. I hung up somewhere around Haynes Mall Boulevard with no plan at all, just a low, steady heat sitting behind my sternum that didn't go away for 3 days. I didn't say a word to Bradley or Vanessa that week. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was strategy. I've closed enough deals in 40 years to know you don't confront anybody until you understand the whole structure of what you're dealing with. But part of it, if I'm being completely honest with you, was that I needed to know whether this was one bad afternoon from a 14-year-old boy showing off for his friends, or whether it was something that had been built into him, brick by brick, without me noticing. So I started paying attention differently. I called Dr. Sims, well, her successor now, a man named Thomas Ferris who'd taken over as head of school in 2021, and I asked, in my capacity as Mr. K, whether I could see the anonymized results from the school's most recent climate survey, the one they send out every spring to gauge how students from different backgrounds experience the campus. I'd never asked for that before in 12 years. Ferris sent it over within the hour. I sat at my kitchen table on Reynolda Road that Tuesday night with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, and I read comment after comment from scholarship students, some going back 4 years. Comments about being asked where they got their clothes. Comments about being left off group chats for class projects. One comment, from a boy 2 years ahead of Maya, that read simply, "I stopped bringing my lunch from home because kids used to ask if it was food stamp food." I didn't know it yet, but that survey was only the beginning of what I was about to find. The next Thursday, I drove out to a coffee shop on Reynolda Road, a place called Camino Bakery, and I met with Rosa Delgado, Maya's mother. I'd gotten her number through the scholarship file, which as Mr. K, I had every right to access. Rosa works 12-hour shifts 3 days a week as a certified nursing assistant at Forsyth Medical Center and picks up house cleaning work on her days off to cover what the scholarship doesn't. She showed up in her scrubs, tired around the eyes in a way I recognized from my own mother, and she sat across from me not knowing that the man in front of her had been quietly funding her daughter's education since the 4th grade. I introduced myself only as a member of the school's scholarship advisory committee doing a routine check-in. I asked her how Maya was doing. Rosa's face did something complicated. "She's doing wonderful in her classes," Rosa said carefully. "Straight A's since 6th grade. Straight A's, Mr. Kessler." She used my real last name because that's what was on the intake form, and hearing it in her mouth without the Mr. K in front of it gave me a small, strange jolt. But some days she doesn't want to go. I don't push about why. I just tell her, "Mija, you keep going, you keep your head up, and someday none of this will matter." "Has anything specific happened?" I asked, keeping my voice level, the way I would in a boardroom. Rosa hesitated. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a group chat, one Maya wasn't supposed to have access to, but had been added to by mistake back in 8th grade and never removed from. Screenshots her daughter had shown her months ago, half out of hurt and half, I think, because a 14-year-old needs somewhere to put that kind of weight. I scrolled through message after message. Jokes about scholarship smell. A poll, an actual poll, asking classmates to guess which students were on the free plan. And near the bottom, dated back in September, A message from a username I recognized instantly because I'd seen that handle before on Preston's old gaming account. Preston had written, "Some of these kids literally don't belong here. My mom says it too. My mom says it too." I sat in that coffee shop and I felt the floor of my own understanding shift under me like a load-bearing wall giving out. I want to pause here because I know some of you listening are wondering whether I'm going to tell you I went home and screamed at my son and daughter-in-law that night. I didn't. I've built things my whole life, and the one lesson 41 years of engineering taught me better than any other is this: you don't tear down a structure in anger. You find the exact point of failure, and then you fix it so it never fails again in the same place. I called Ray again that night from my study. "It's worse than I thought," I told him. "Vanessa's been saying this at home." To a 14-year-old boy who repeats everything he hears. Ray was quiet for a moment. "You going to talk to Bradley?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to understand the whole thing first. I want to know if this is a Vanessa problem or a bigger problem." "And Ray, there's a board meeting on the 28th. Annual scholarship review. I've got a seat at that table nobody in my family knows about. So use it," Ray said again, same as before, steady as a man who'd spent 26 years watching families fall apart in his courtroom and knew exactly what it looked like right before somebody finally did something about it. "But Walt, when you do it clean. Do it so nobody in that room can say you acted out of anger. You do it with paper." That's exactly what I did. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my case the same way I design a bridge, load by load, with margin for error, checking every joint twice. I requested, as Mr. K, a full 3-year history of disciplinary reports involving comments about scholarship students, something the school tracks quietly but had never been asked to compile in aggregate. 14 incidents in 3 years, 6 of them never escalated past a verbal warning. I requested the minutes from the last 4 parent association meetings and found, buried in an April entry, a comment from Vanessa Hale Kessler at a fundraising committee meeting, recorded almost verbatim by the secretary. "I just think if we're going to keep expanding the scholarship program, we need to think about whether it's actually good for campus culture." Nobody had objected. It had simply been noted and moved past. I drove out to Ashcombe itself one afternoon, told the front office I was there for committee business, and I sat quietly in the back of the cafeteria during the lunch period, something Mr. K had never bothered to do in 12 years. I watched which tables the scholarship kids sat at. I watched Maya Delgado eat alone at the end of a table with 2 other girls, all 3 of them quiet in a room full of noise. I watched my own grandson, 3 tables over, laughing with Grayson and Beckett, utterly unaware that his grandfather was sitting 40 feet away watching him become someone I didn't fully recognize. I didn't know it yet, but the board meeting on the 28th was going to be the exact right moment, because Vanessa herself had a spot on that evening's agenda. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge Stories. If you're just joining us, grab a seat, because this next part is the reason I asked you to subscribe before we started. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever sat quiet in a room while someone you love said something you couldn't believe came out of their mouth, you're going to understand exactly what I was carrying into that boardroom. The Ashcombe Board of Trustees meets on the 4th Tuesday of every month in a conference room on the 2nd floor of Whitfield Hall, the same building with the auditorium where Preston had pointed across a courtyard 3 weeks earlier. 12 trustees, the head of school, and on the agenda that night, a proposal from the Parent Association's fundraising committee, presented, as it turned out, by Vanessa Hale Kessler herself, to restructure the scholarship allocation formula. I'd read the proposal in advance because Mr. K received every board packet. Underneath careful, polished language about sustainability and long-term enrollment balance, the proposal would have cut the Ridge Avenue Scholars Fund's intake by 40% and redirected the freed tuition slots toward what the document called legacy continuity applicants. I read that phrase 4 times before I understood what it meant. It meant fewer kids like Maya Delgado. It meant more kids who already had 2 generations of family portraits on the chapel wall. I walked into that boardroom at 6:55 that evening in a gray suit I hadn't worn since my retirement dinner, and I sat down in the seat marked K that had been reserved and empty for 12 years, because Mr. K had never once attended in person. Thomas Ferris, the head of school, looked up from his folder, did a small double take, and then, God bless him, said nothing, just gave me the smallest nod, like a man who understood exactly what kind of night this was about to become. Vanessa didn't notice me until she stood up to present. I watched the moment it landed on her face. The recognition, then the confusion, then something colder settling underneath both. The particular look of a person doing rapid math on what her father-in-law was doing sitting in a chair with a nameplate that read Mr. K. She got through about 4 minutes of her presentation before I raised my hand. Point of clarification, I said. My voice was calm. I want you to understand that. I had spent 3 days rehearsing exactly how calm I was going to keep it. Before we vote on this, I think the board deserves to know exactly whose fund we're talking about restructuring. Ferris nodded at me to continue. Vanessa's mouth had gone thin and flat. My name is Walter Kessler, I said, to the whole table now, not just to her. 12 years ago, I established the Ridge Avenue Scholars Fund at this school with a gift of $2.4 million, structured anonymously through a donor-advised account, and I've served on the Scholarship Review Committee under the name Mr. K every year since. I've personally read the application of every child currently enrolled through that fund, including a freshman named Maya Delgado, whose GPA, for the record, is a 4.3, and who has never once, in 3 years at this school, been asked by the administration whether her presence here was good for campus culture. I let that phrase sit exactly where I'd found it, quoted straight from the minutes. Vanessa's face went the color of the folder in her hands. I have those minutes here, from your own committee, if anyone would like to see them. The room was completely silent. I could hear the air conditioning cycle on. 3 weeks ago, I continued, at the Fall Family Showcase. My grandson Preston stood in that courtyard right outside this building and told a 14-year-old scholarship student, in front of a crowd of adults, that poor people shouldn't be allowed at schools like this one. Several adults standing nearby laughed. One of them was his mother. I looked directly at Vanessa when I said that last sentence, and I want you to know, I never once raised my voice. I have message logs showing that same sentiment being repeated by other students in this building, sourced from language they say they heard at home. I have 3 years of disciplinary reports this school has never once aggregated and looked at as a pattern. And tonight, this board was about to vote on a proposal to cut the very scholarship fund that brought that girl here, based on language that describes children like her as a threat to, and I'm quoting the document in front of you, campus culture. Nobody at that table said a word for what felt like a full minute. Ferris finally spoke, quiet and steady. Mr. Kessler, would you like to formally withdraw the fund from committee vote tonight, given the conflict of interest on the presenting side? I'd like to do more than that, I said. I'd like to propose doubling it. I want to tell you exactly what happened to Vanessa's face in that moment, because I've thought about it 100 times since. It wasn't anger. It was the look of a woman realizing, in real time, in front of 11 trustees and her own family lawyer's father, that the ground she'd been standing on for years had never actually been hers. She didn't say anything else that night. She gathered her folder, said something quiet to Ferris about needing to step out, and left the building. I stayed for the rest of the meeting. The board voted 10-1 to reject the restructuring proposal and to formally recognize the Ridge Avenue Scholars Fund's expansion, with my additional commitment on the table, effective the following academic year. The one dissenting vote, incidentally, belonged to a trustee named Charles Pemberton, whose grandson happened to be named Grayson. I noted that. I filed it away. I want you to understand I file everything away. That's what 41 years in engineering teaches you. Nothing gets built right without a record of every load it's ever carried. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was 51 degrees outside, because I needed the air. I didn't know it yet, but the hardest conversation of the whole thing wasn't the boardroom. It was still waiting for me at my own kitchen table. Bradley called me the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. His voice had that particular flatness I remembered from when he was 17 and got caught with a scratch on the family car. Not angry yet, just bracing. "Dad," he said, "Vanessa told me what happened last night. Is it true? 12 years. "It's true," I said. There was a long pause. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because I wanted to know what you all actually believed," I said, "when you thought nobody with any power over you was listening. And Bradley, I found out. He came over that afternoon, alone, without Vanessa, without Preston. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd read that climate survey 3 weeks earlier, and for a long while neither of us said anything. Then he said, quietly, I didn't know Preston said that. About the girl. I want you to know I didn't know. I believe you," I said. But you need to ask yourself where he learned it, because it wasn't from me, and it wasn't from you sitting silent while it happened in your own house, either. Bradley's jaw tightened. Vanessa's been saying things, he admitted, finally, like the words had been sitting behind a dam for years. Little comments. About the scholarship kids. About the neighborhood some of them come from. I told myself it was just, I don't know, Dad. I told myself it was just talk. It's never just talk, I said. Not to a 14-year-old who's still deciding who he's going to become. I told him everything I'd found. The group chat. The disciplinary pattern nobody had ever aggregated. The proposal that would have cut Maya Delgado's kind of scholarship by 40%. I watched my son's face age about 10 years across that conversation, and I want to be honest with you. Some part of me ached for him, because I don't think he ever set out to raise the boy I saw in that courtyard. I think he simply stopped paying attention at exactly the moment it mattered most. What do you want me to do? He finally asked. I want you and Vanessa to sit down with Preston tonight, I said, and I want him to understand, in real terms, what he did. Not a lecture. Not a punishment that disappears in a week. I want him to meet her. Meet who? Maya Delgado, I said. The girl he pointed at. Bradley didn't argue. I think, by that point, he didn't have anything left to argue with. Here's what happened over the next month, and I want to walk you through it slowly, because this is the part of the story that matters most to me, more than the boardroom, more than watching Vanessa's face go pale in front of 11 trustees. I arranged, through Thomas Ferris and with Rosa Delgado's full knowledge and permission, for Preston to spend 6 Saturdays that fall volunteering at the same food pantry on Peters Creek Parkway where, it turned out, Rosa Delgado had once been a client herself. Back when Maya was in kindergarten and Rosa was 2 years out from finishing her CNA certification. I didn't send Preston there to be punished for a photo op. I sent him there because I wanted him standing in a line packing grocery boxes next to people whose lives he'd casually decided, in a courtyard, weren't worth as much as his own. The first Saturday, Preston didn't say 10 words the whole shift. I know because I was there too, standing next to him in a hairnet, packing canned green beans into cardboard boxes at 67 years old, not because anybody made me, but because I wasn't going to ask that boy to sit with something I wasn't willing to sit with myself. By the 4th Saturday, something had shifted. He started talking to the other volunteers. A woman named Denise, who packed boxes next to us most weeks, told him one afternoon about raising 3 kids on her own after her husband passed, working 2 jobs, one of her sons now in his 2nd year at Forsyth Tech, studying to be an electrician. Preston listened to that whole story without interrupting once. I watched him do it. I want you to understand what that meant to me. Watching my grandson actually listen to someone for the first time in longer than I could remember. The meeting with Maya happened on a Sunday afternoon in November, at Rosa's request, not mine. She wanted it on her terms, in her home, a small brick duplex off Ivy Avenue with a wreath on the door, even though it wasn't yet Thanksgiving. Bradley drove Preston over. I came too, at Rosa's invitation, sitting quietly in a folding chair in the corner of a living room that smelled like cinnamon and fresh coffee. Preston apologized. I want to tell you it was eloquent, that he said exactly the right thing, but that's not how 14-year-olds work, and I wouldn't trust it if it had been that polished. He was awkward. His voice cracked once. He said, I didn't think about what it would feel like. I just wanted Grayson to laugh. That's it. That's the whole reason, and it's a stupid reason, and I'm sorry. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something I've thought about every single day since. I forgive you, she said, but I'm not going to forget it. Those are different things. I watched my grandson absorb that sentence the way you watch a load settle onto a beam you've just finished welding. The whole structure shifting, quietly, to bear something new. Now here's the part one promised you. The sweet part. The part that matters more to me than any of the rest of it. I want to tell you about Rosa Delgado, because loyalty like hers doesn't come around often, and it deserves more than a footnote. Rosa never once, in 3 years of Maya attending Ashcombe on scholarship, asked the school for a single extra thing. Not a fee waiver on the science trip to the coast. Not help with the uniform costs that add up faster than people think. She worked her shifts, she cleaned other people's houses on her days off, and she drove Maya to school every morning in a 2009 Honda Civic with 211,000 miles on it, because she refused to let her daughter take the activity bus that dropped kids off 40 minutes after the first bell. At that same board meeting where I doubled the Ridge Avenue Scholars Fund, I also did something I hadn't planned in advance, Something that came to me sitting in that room watching Rosa's daughter's name get discussed by people who'd never met her. I proposed a second fund, smaller, direct, no committee required, a family support stipend, for $1,000 a year, for scholarship families to cover transportation, activity fees, and the thousand small costs that never show up on a tuition invoice but quietly exhaust a family anyway. I named it, without asking anyone's permission, the Rosa Delgado Family Fund, and I made Rosa herself the very first recipient, along with 3 other families the following spring. When I drove out to tell her in person, she cried standing in her own kitchen, an apron still tied around her waist from making dinner, and she said, "Mr. Kessler, you don't understand. Nobody has ever done anything for me. Everything I have I built with my own 2 hands. I know exactly what that feels like," I told her. My father worked a loom in a cotton mill for 34 years and never once asked anyone for a favor either. This isn't charity, Rosa. This is somebody finally noticing the weight you've been carrying alone. Maya got a full ride to a summer engineering program at NC State the following June, the same program I'd attended on scholarship myself back in 1977, a detail neither of us realized until Rosa mentioned the acceptance letter over coffee, and I had to set my cup down for a second before I trusted my voice. Preston asked to come visit her there one weekend that summer, just to see the campus, he said, though I think by then something else was going on in that boy's head too. Something closer to genuine friendship than guilt. As for Vanessa, I want to be fair here, because this isn't a story about punishing a woman for the rest of her life. She and Bradley had a hard several months. I know she went to counseling on her own, without Bradley pushing her into it. And I know that by the following spring she'd resigned her seat on the Parent Association's fundraising committee and quietly, without any announcement, begun volunteering 2 Saturdays a month at the same food pantry on Peters Creek Parkway, where her son had spent that fall learning to pack boxes of canned green beans. I don't know exactly what changed in her. I only know that people can change if the mirror gets held up close enough and long enough, and I chose, eventually, to believe she was trying. Charles Pemberton, the one trustee who'd voted against the fund's expansion, resigned from the board that spring after it came out, through channels I had nothing to do with. I want to be clear about that. That his own grandson Grayson had been the ringleader behind that group chat poll asking classmates to guess which students were on the free plan. Some structures, once the crack is exposed, simply can't hold the weight anymore on their own. I didn't push him out. The truth did that on its own, the way it usually does if you give it enough daylight. I think about that afternoon in the courtyard more than I think about almost anything else in my life. Not because it was the worst thing I've ever heard. I buried a wife of 39 years to cancer in 2016, and I know exactly what the worst thing feels like, and this wasn't that. But because it was the moment I understood something about money and comfort that I don't think I ever fully understood before, even after 4 decades of building things from nothing. Money doesn't teach a child anything on its own. It's neutral. It's just steel and concrete waiting to be shaped into whatever the people around it decide to build. I gave my son every comfort I never had growing up in that 4-room house in Kannapolis, and somewhere in that giving, without meaning to, I let 2 generations forget what the weight actually felt like. It took a 14-year-old girl standing perfectly still in a courtyard, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her cry, to remind my whole family what it costs to forget. Preston is a sophomore now. He and Maya aren't close friends, not in the way you'd want for a tidy ending. They run in different circles, different interests, and I've never once tried to force something that isn't real. But he says hello to her in the hallway now. He asked her, this past spring, without any prompting from me or from Bradley, whether she wanted to be on his team for the robotics competition, because her erosion model the year before had been the best thing on that stage, and he knew it. She said yes. They placed second in the regional that April, and I sat in the 3rd row of a different auditorium in Greensboro, 70 years old now in every way that matters, even though my birth certificate says 67, and I watched my grandson hand her the trophy first. I still go to that scholarship review meeting every spring. I go by Mr. K, mostly, though everyone on that committee now knows exactly who's behind the initials, and every year I read essays from kids across Forsyth County who remind me a little of a boy in wired-together boots on Ridge Avenue in 1966. Some years I think about how close I came to never finding out what my own family believed underneath the surface. I think about how easy it would have been to stay quiet in that third row, to let the laugh pass, to tell myself boys will be boys and grow out of it on their own. I didn't stay quiet. I stood up in a boardroom instead, and I said the only thing that mattered, that a 14-year-old girl who studies at a table with 2 liters of dirt on a Saturday morning belongs in that building every bit as much as any child whose family portrait hangs on the chapel wall. Maybe more, because she's the one who had to earn it twice, once to get in, and once more, every single day, just to be seen. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, whatever chair you're sitting in tonight, it's this. The people you love will only become as decent as the rooms you're willing to stand up in for them. I spent 12 years quietly funding second chances for kids I'd never met. It took one afternoon in a courtyard to teach me that the most important second chance I ever needed to give was to my own grandson, and the only way to give it to him honestly was to make him meet the exact weight of what he'd said, face to face, in a living room that smelled like cinnamon, from a girl brave enough to forgive him without ever once agreeing to forget. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe if you haven't already, because we've got more stories just like this one coming every week right here on Sweet Family Revenge Stories. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I'll see you on the next one.